Hippopotamus Postman. And joining us today is the Hippopotamus Postman himself, Dr. Joseph Ozawa.
Hello, welcome.
Dr. Ozawa is a psychological consultant with the Singaporean government, where he works with poor and troubled children and adolescents.
When you listen to these stories, frequently people think that I made them up. But every one of them is true. Every story has actually happened. I've either witnessed it myself or other people have told me the stories.
The Hippopotamus Postman. Once upon a time, I was searching and searching for an answer to this question. What should I do with my life? Then I heard that there was a man who was a prophet. A prophet is a man who speaks for God. He seems to have a direct telephone line to God, and many times he tells people about their lives. This prophet I'd heard of was in a place called Kansas City, halfway across America from where I lived at the time. My wife and I flew out there and met him at his house. His house was old and wooden. When we arrived, we entered and met the prophet, a man with a very big belly and nice white hair. With him were two other very important-looking men. The prophet had a message for each one of us. First, he went up to one of the men and he said, "You're going to be a great evangelist. You're going to talk to thousands and thousands of people." Then he went up to the next man and he said to him, you're going to be a great pastor, and you will take care of hundreds of people." Well, I smiled. The prophet seemed like a very friendly man. He had said such nice things about all the other men. I couldn't wait for my turn. I was certain he would have wonderful things to say about me too. Then he went up to my wife and he said to her, "You're such a very special lady. Why, you will be like a songbird. You'll be singing for God. Also, you will counsel many women who are hurting." Well, we knew it was right because my wife sang in choirs and also liked to listen to women who had lots of problems. Well, my turn was coming next. Finally, the old man walked up to me and looked at me straight in the eyes. Then, in a very loud voice, he said to me, "Oh, you're going to be a hippopotamus." A what? I was really shocked. I was embarrassed. I just stared at the old man. I felt like running away to hide. Such great things for everyone else. And I am a hippopotamus? Well, before I left, I got up the courage to go to the prophet. I couldn't leave like that, could I? Isn't there anything more you can say about me? I asked him very shyly. He paused to think about it. He scratched his head. Well, yes, I think so, he replied. You will be a hippopotamus postman. Well, thank you, I said, feeling just terrible. How crushing. I didn't know at all what he was talking about. I'd come halfway across America and I was sad and depressed. Oh, I know this is strange, but could you please tell me just a little bit, just a few more things, a little more about being a hippopotamus postman? To be honest, I don't really understand. Don't you know anything? The prophet asked. You're a hippopotamus. Now, hippos are kind of silly looking with those funny little ears. But don't you know that in the jungle, the hippo is one of the most feared animals. He is fierce. You see, nothing can stop a hippo from going where he wants to go. He is big. He is strong. He just goes everywhere without anything blocking him. He's so big that nothing gets in his way. Absolutely nothing. And you're going to be like that hippo. Nothing is going to stop you. Do you understand? I guess so, I replied. But what about the postman part, I asked, getting up more courage. Oh, have you no understanding, young man, he asked. You are going to be delivering letters. Letters? I asked, feeling stupid again. Love letters from God, the man said loudly, and you're going to go all around the world telling people about God's love. Well, then I knew. I finally knew what my purpose in life was supposed to be. I was supposed to go all around delivering love letters from God. And nothing is supposed to stop me from delivering the message. So this program you're now watching is the result. It was hard getting it done. It's been hard getting it translated into different languages. But you see, the fact that this program is brought to you means that nothing has stopped these love letters from getting through to you. Oh yes, and one more thing. Perhaps one day, you too, you might become a hippopotamus postman. The world really needs lots of hippo postmen and postwomen too. There are lots of love letters to deliver and many, many more countries to go. A little Russian girl. One day, years ago, I was in Russia, in a very poor city along the Volga River. It was a city where people were very poor and there was so much pollution that many were dying from cancer. So many of the people came from fatherless families because During World War II, thousands of Russian men were killed in a battle nearby. Also, under Joseph Stalin, millions of Russians had been murdered or sent away to concentration camps where they had died. It was a sad city. It was a gray city. It was a lonely city with many older women around. One day, I went to this city to teach. Many of the people who came to my meeting were called babushkas. These are older Russian ladies, very big ladies, very strong ladies, very tough ladies, who are the ones who worked on the farms and on the railroads of Russia while the men had been at war. Along with these old ladies, there was a little girl who came to every meeting. She had a very pretty face and her eyes sparkled like stars in the night sky. Well, sometimes she had to squeeze to crawl around all those big babushkas. I do not know if she really understood everything I was talking about. Sometimes she would be paying attention. Other times it looked like she was just drawing pictures. Even during one meeting, it looked like the little girl was maybe sleeping. But she was there at every meeting. She would push past the big adults and sit near the front. Her smile would light up every meeting. Then, the day that I was leaving the city, the little girl pushed past all the big ladies and shoved her way to the front where I was standing. She ran up to me and put something in my hand, and I put it in my pocket. Then later, when I was alone with my interpreter, I took it out of my pocket. That little girl who comes to all these meetings gave this to me, I said. What was it? It looked like a small diamond. I looked closer. It was only a piece of plastic cut in the shape of a small diamond. When I showed it to my Russian interpreter, she said, "Oh my, oh my." "What's wrong?" I asked her. "Well, you see how poor the people are around here. That little girl had only one dress to wear. Did you notice that she wore the same dress every day? Well, one of the only things that girl has for herself is a pair of earrings, fake diamond earrings, and because of her great love for you, she broke off one of her earrings and gave it to you. That's why I say, oh my, it's so sweet." And she began to cry. Nothing to give. Yes, the little girl had nothing to give me. And yet, out of a tender and loving heart, the sweet little girl broke her favorite earrings and gave me one half. That's the most precious gift I've ever received in my whole life. That little Russian girl taught me about love. The Odd Angel. One day, when I was living in America, I was walking near a park and saw a very sad-looking man sitting down. He was very dirty. His hair looked like it hadn't been washed in months. His clothes looked very old and smelled bad. One of his arms was in a sling because it looked like his arm had been broken or terribly hurt. next to him, well, next to him was a big bottle of wine. He had been drinking and drinking so much alcohol. It was only 10 a.m. in the morning, and he was drunk. But the worst thing of all was his unhappy face. He was one of the saddest-looking people I've ever seen. He was a lonely man, and I walked up to him. He didn't even look up at me. "Hello? Hello?" I said to the man. "Huh?" he said, a little surprised to see me there. "What do you want?" "Well, can I help you? Can I do something?" I offered. He began to tell me about his life, how he was once a bus driver. He lost his job. He had no family, no friends. Then he had fallen and hurt his knee. He had no money. He had nowhere to go. He hadn't had any good food to eat in weeks. He was unhappy, and he knew he drank too much alcohol. But he said, "Well, I just can't help it." And so he talked to me, and I listened to him. And that went on for a long time. And he said he wanted to quit drinking, and I encouraged him. And I said, "You can quit drinking. You must stop drinking." And he said, "Yes, I will," and he threw down his bottle. I put my arm around his shoulders and asked him if I could pray for his life. And he said, "Oh, yes." So I held his weak, bony shoulders and prayed for God to love him, to make his life like new. I asked God to heal his broken arm. But most of all, I asked God to do a miracle, to heal his broken heart, to do something for all the pain, all the sadness that I could see in his eyes. Well, suddenly he began to smile, and he looked almost happy. I gave him all the money I had, and I told him to get some new clothes and to have a good meal to eat. I can't take your money," he said. "Well, of course you can. You need it more than I do," I said. And he smiled, and he finally took the money. "I won't spend it on alcohol, I promise," he said. Well, I believed the man. And after a little more time, we sat and we laughed, and then it was finally time for me to go. And it was good talking to him, but it was getting late. And so I stood up and I began walking away, and he smiled and he waved goodbye. And I looked back at him and smiled at him. But then suddenly he yelled at me, and he said to me in his strong voice, "Come back! Come back here! You come back here!" Well, I turned around and looked at him. "What is it?" I asked. "What do you want?" "I know the truth. I know who you really are," he said, smiling. "What? What are you talking about?" I asked, thinking maybe he's drunk. "You can't fool me. I know who you really are," he repeated. "You're an angel." I laughed and I laughed, and he seemed really upset at my laughing. I'd never had anyone call me an angel before. I'm not an angel, I said to him. And he looked at me, and he pointed at me again, and he said, yes, you are an angel. Well, have you ever seen an Asian angel like me? I asked. Well, no, I never have, he said, but you can't fool me. I know you must be an angel, maybe an odd angel, but still, you're definitely an angel. Well, what makes you so sure? I asked. How do you know? Well, I thought maybe that he would tell me that he thought I was an angel because I gave him all my money, or because he no longer wanted to drink alcohol and threw away his bottles, or maybe because I prayed for him and he felt better about his life. And then he said, I know that you're an angel because you're the only person who has touched me in 1 year. And he said this, and he smiled brightly. Well, there it was. What he needed was something I didn't realize. Not money, not even prayer. He didn't even need a new job. He didn't even need a miracle cure. What he needed was someone to just put his arm around him and give him a little touch of love. A faithful friend. My father was very sick with a disease called Parkinson's disease. My mother died earlier than my father, and I tried to take care of him, but couldn't. The disease makes a person more and more sick and more helpless each day. And finally, I had to place my father in a convalescent home and then in a hospital. In those days, there was just no way to treat this illness except with medicines that didn't work very well. My father was in this hospital for over 5 years. During that time, I tried to tell my father about God's love because he didn't really know God. My grandparents had been Buddhists and worshipped ancestors, but my father didn't seem to believe in very much at all. Well, maybe he believed in hard work and he believed in saving money, but nothing much more than that. But my father wouldn't listen to me when I talked to him. After all, I was the son and he was the father. My opinions were not very important to him. One day, during the early part of his stay in this hospital, a friend of my father's came to visit him. The friend's name was James. James had been my father's childhood friend. They grew up together, and James was very poor and old himself and somewhat sick, but he came faithfully to see my father. He had to travel a long way by bus, but he always came. Some days he came with a few pieces of sweets for my father. Sometimes he would come with a fruit. However, my father, he was a very suspicious man. "What does James want from me?" my father asked. He must want my money." "But father, you don't have any money to give him," I replied. "Oh, yes, that's true," said my father, as if suddenly remembering. But there must be something he wants from me. He keeps coming to visit me and bringing me nice things. You see, we Asians aren't very good at receiving gifts from anyone. We always expect to give something back in return, and nothing is given very freely. Well, that went on for many years. Sometimes he would clip his fingernails. Sometimes he would shave my father. Sometimes he would take his dirty laundry home and bring it back fresh and clean. And sometimes they just sat, and James would tell stories about their childhood, and they would laugh together about the silly things they did when they were children. Then about the 5th year that my father had been in the hospital, on one of my visits, I saw a very big Bible on my father's bed. "Father, what is that?" I asked. "What do you think it is?" he answered angrily. "I thought you were a Christian. Don't you know the Bible? James gave it to me." "Well, of course I know the Bible," I answered. "So what are you reading in it?" "I'm going to read the whole Bible," my father said. And so he started to read the Bible that his faithful friend had given to him. Well, my father got to the book of Leviticus, and then he got stuck. Now, if you ever read the Bible, you'll see that Leviticus is definitely not the most interesting book in the Bible. I suggested to him that he read the book of John the Apostle or Luke the doctor, but my father was a stubborn man. He just wanted to start at the very beginning and finish the whole Bible. But unfortunately, he got stuck in the book of Leviticus, and whenever he tried to read it, he just fell asleep. Then one day, I went to visit him, and there was a very big picture of Jesus above his head. "Father," I said, "what is that?" "Don't you know Jesus?" he asked, annoyed with me as usual. "Well, of course, I know Jesus," I answered, "but why do you have his picture above your bed?" "Because James gave it to me," was all my father would say, and that seemed to explain it all. Anything James did was fine, and everything I did seemed wrong. Then one day, in the 6th year of James's visits, James called me on the telephone. And he said to me, "You must come to church this Sunday," he said to me, "because your father has come to know God, and your father is going to be baptized." So I went to church that day, and my father was baptized. 1 week later, my father died. And a little over 2 weeks later, after my father died, James also died. James had finished his job on this earth. And as I've been in many nations, I've never found another man with such great love as James. He cared and cared so much for my father, And it was love that changed my father's life for eternity. James's love was faithful. His precious love was in doing small things. But it was small things done with so much love that finally turned my father's heart towards God's love. Forgiveness in Rwanda. When I visited Rwanda in Africa, I was expecting the worst. After all, like everyone else, I had seen such horrible things on television and in magazines. I had read about terrible things that happened between the Hutus and the Tutsis. Hatred among friends, neighbors, and families. And my job was to go to Rwanda to help heal the hearts of the people. I wasn't ready for what I found. 1994 had been a terrible year, maybe the worst year in the history of that small nation, Rwanda. Over 700,000 people had been murdered. Oh, such a terrible thing between neighbors, between Hutus and Tutsis, men, women, and children. So many killed. So much blood was shed in that land. There was so much hatred and violence. But then a man named Antoine told me a story about a woman named Rosalie. Rosalie came to a meeting in crutches. Her face and whole body was wrapped in white bandages. Her neck was held in place by a special plaster collar. Everyone who looked at Rosalie felt sorry for her because it was clear that she had been chopped by a machete knife. In fact, it was learned that Rosalie's whole family had been murdered, and then they had cut Rosalie in her temples, her head, her neck, all over her whole body, and she had been thrown on the roadside to die. This is what Rosalie said. I know all the people who did this to me. They were our neighbors. I spoke to them, and they finally gave me time to pray for them before they started cutting me. And I prayed for them and prayed for them to forgive them until finally I lost consciousness. And then for 3 days, Rosalie had bled and suffered pain from the cuts, thirst, and cold under the heavy rains as she lay along the roadside. Oh, can you imagine the pain that young girl suffered? And everyone expected her to be so angry and bitter and ready to kill those who killed her family and left her crippled for her whole life. But instead, this is what Rosalie said. I forgave these people. I forgave them even before they did it. And I still, in my heart, feel forgiveness for every one of those people. Well, someone asked Rosalie, what would you do if you met the killers today? After all, the government was now prosecuting the criminals who committed all the murders. What would you do? And she said, if I were to meet them today, I would not hand them over to justice, for I have forgiven them, and I wish them well. I pray for God to save their souls. What amazed me was that in the middle of such horrible things, in the middle of anger and hatred and murder and prejudice and bloodshed, here was a woman who loved. Like a ray of light, like a light in the darkness, like a beautiful flower blooming in the desert, like a smile in a sea of unhappy faces. That was the great love that shined through young Rosalie and could be seen in her eyes and in her heart of forgiveness and love. I expected Rwanda to be a nation of horrors and a nation of hatred, but instead I found it to be filled with people like Rosalie. In all the war, in all the killing, there were people like Rosalie. For Rwanda had become a nation of extreme love, of forgiveness, of bravery, big, big love, which overcame all the hatred in the world. The Good Muslim. One day, while visiting some sick people in the hospital, I met a young man who was dying of AIDS, a very deadly disease. There is no cure for AIDS that we know of. AIDS is also very, very contagious, and that means that anyone around a person with AIDS can catch the disease if there is an accident, especially involving blood. No one likes being around a person with AIDS for that reason. As I talked to this young man, he told me that he was not sick enough to stay in the hospital forever. However, his whole family and all of his old friends had rejected him because he had AIDS. They felt he was probably a bad person, an immoral man, because many people who get AIDS get the disease from some kind of immoral action, like going to a prostitute or using drugs. And this man admitted to me that he had gotten AIDS by drug use. "Please, please help me," he cried. "No one wants me, and the hospital people have told me that they can't keep me here forever. Where will I go? Nobody wants me," he said very sadly. "I'll end up dying on the streets." "I'll do the best I can," I said, hopeful that I could find some place for this young man. And so I started calling. I called one place after another. So many places that I thought might be able to help him, and they only said to me, "Well, this is very difficult. I hope you understand how sensitive this is, but sorry, we cannot help you." Well, then I tried religious groups. After all, they, of all people, should be able to help me. And so I called churches, and they said, "This might endanger the other men we have in our house. And we must think of the good of everyone. I hope you understand, and sorry, we can't help you at all." Well, I went to the directors and I pleaded with them. But it was like the young man had leprosy. There were lots of statements of help, but no one actually wanted to take him in. And I became very discouraged and upset and didn't know where to go. Then finally I found a young Muslim man who was working at a halfway house. After I talked to him for some time and told him the story about this person with AIDS, he stared at me. "Is this man a Muslim? Our house is mainly for Muslims," he said to me. "Well, I'm sorry," I said. He's a Buddhist, actually," I replied. "Wrong religion," he said. But as I got up to leave, this young Muslim man looked at me, and he said to me, wait a minute, just a minute." "Yes?" I asked. "I will take him in," he replied. "You will?" I said, amazed by the response of this young Muslim man. "I must take him in," the young Muslim replied. "How can we say we love God and not love our fellow human beings?" This young Muslim taught me all about love and what love means to love our neighbors. A bit of rice. I have never been to such a sad place as Calcutta, India. There are so many people living on the streets, and often you will see a small child dying right in front of you on the sidewalk or roadside. The child may look like a bundle of rags. It made me cry. But there's something about Calcutta that touches a person's heart, so we can never be the same after having visited there. And often in the most horrible of places come the most beautiful stories. This is one of Mother Teresa of Calcutta. She tells this beautiful story of someone who came to her house at night and said to her, "There's a Hindu family with 8 children, and they have gone several days without eating." She took a bit of rice and went immediately to their help. The Hindu mother took the rice from Mother Teresa's hand and divided it into 2 equal servings. Then the Hindu mother went out immediately. When the Hindu woman returned, Mother Teresa asked her, "But where have you been? What have you been doing?" "They are hungry too," she answered. You see, right next door to this woman and her children lived a Muslim family with the same number of children. And the Hindu mother knew that they had been without food also for several days. Mother Teresa ends by saying, "This woman broke her love and shared it with her neighbors." "I cannot describe to you," she says, "the faces of these youngsters. When I went into their house, I knew that they were suffering. I could see their little faces. I could see their eyes shining because of the hunger. But when I left, their eyes were shining with joy because both the mother and the children were able to share their love with others." Then Mother Teresa goes on to say, "What impressed me most was that this woman knew. Do you know who the poor people are in your life? Do we know the poor in our own families, in our own homes? Oh, we may not be hungry for food or water or material things, but we might be poor for love. Not hungry for a piece of bread, and perhaps our children, husband, father, mother, wife are not hungry or naked, but are you sure that there is no one there in your family who feels unwanted? Mother Teresa asks us to look at our lives, those of us who do not live in Calcutta, but in other countries. Is there someone in your life who needs something you can do for them? Someone who is alone, who needs love, a gentle touch of affection, or maybe just a simple smile from us. A message in the sky. Many years ago, in the early 1990s, a group of school children went on a school retreat at a beach called CR Beach on the island of Borneo. Borneo is in Southeast Asia. The children were all girls in primary school, and several teachers were in charge of the trip. As one of the teachers was preparing for the trip, she thought she heard God say to her, "If all of you pray and confess all the wrong things you've done, you will have a great sign from God." The teacher, named Susie, was a quiet little woman, and she didn't usually do things that were strange in her life. In fact, she was pretty normal. But this day she told the girls what she thought she had heard. Well, like good students, the girls around her listened to her, and they began praying and confessing the things that they'd done wrong. And it took a lot of time. There were many things to ask forgiveness for, even in such young girls as this. And then, after they had finished praying, the girls waited. And they waited. It was quite late at night. In fact, it was around 2 a.m. in the morning. The teachers and the children all went outside to the beach and gazed up into the quiet night sky. It was so very dark. Then suddenly, to their amazement, they saw something. There were lights in the dark night sky. These were not stars. These were not airplanes or helicopters. This was not the moon. These weren't even meteors. These lights began moving around in the dark sky in strange ways. The lights began drawing pictures and writing words in the black evening sky. Can you imagine how shocked and excited the girls were? They began to squeal and to giggle and scream and jump and shout and cry and laugh and point up into the air. Oh, it was an exciting time. They saw hearts showing how much God loves us. They saw words like joy, love, and peace, which is what God wants for us humans on earth. And then they saw sentences written in the sky. One that said, "I love my children," which is God's love for all those who know Him. For we are His spiritual children, not His biological children, but His spiritual children. And then they saw their own names written in the sky. Susie and Mei Ling and Mary, which was God's way of showing how He knows each one of us by our own names. And we are all very, very special to Him. Well, there were many other things the girls and their teacher, Susie, saw in that sky that night. And they were all so overcome, so touched in their little hearts, that they began to cry and cry and cry. Not crying because they were sad, but crying because they were so very happy. You see, suddenly these little girls had their eyes opened. And in a wonderful and very special way, God showed them how much He really loves them and how much He loves us too. It was a great, big, gigantic love letter from God, written in the sky for these sweet young children to read. When Susie and her students returned home, they made a tape recording about their experiences because they wanted to share it with everybody else. But do you know what happened to them? Many grown-up people just didn't believe Susie and the children. They laughed at the children, and even other children made fun of the girls and of Susie. And they said mean things about them, that they weren't telling the truth, that they were lying, that they weren't there after all. They were just silly schoolgirls. And this made the girls cry and cry. They were so hurt. It wasn't just that people said mean things to them. These girls were sad because other people, especially grown-up people, had trouble believing God's message of love in the sky. You see, people rejected God's special gift of His love for them. Later on, I met Susie and I listened to her story, and I believed everything that Susie told me. Susie's story is another true story of love. And I talked to her, and I saw that Susie was a normal teacher, a nice, sensible, quiet, truthful teacher. And I looked into her brown eyes, and I saw a very sad but very sane woman. She's one of those 2 + 2 = 4 teachers. No nonsense, not crazy at all. And I believed her, and I believed the girls. I believe what they said about God's love for us, how His love is forever, how His love fills our hearts, how He knows us all by name. He calls us all specially by name. I hope that you too will believe Susie and the girls. Did you learn to receive my love? One day, while asleep, I had an unusual dream. Maybe it was a vision. I found myself suddenly before God in heaven. How did I know it was God? I couldn't see His face, but it was like looking straight at the sun. So bright, so much light, only it wasn't burning. I only had a sense of great love and a power that I didn't understand. And while I was there, I suddenly fell to my knees, and I began to apologize for myself. In fact, I didn't quite know what to apologize for, but I figured that if this is really God, it would be a smart thing to begin our conversation with my apologies. Oh God, I'm sorry that I have not prayed enough, I said so very weakly.
Well, that's very important, but that's not the most important thing.
said God in a very deep and rich voice. Well then, yes, I'm so sorry. I am selfish. You know, I can't help myself sometimes. I apologized. Well, that's very important, but that's not the most important thing, he said to me. Well, then I began apologizing for everything I could think of. What else could I have done wrong? Maybe I didn't give enough to the poor, and maybe I didn't have enough faith. And then a thought came to me. Oh God, I think I know now. I think I know the greatest mistake that I made. I just haven't been nice enough to my wife. I know I should love her better. That must be it. Well, that's very, very, very important, but that's not the most important thing, he said once again. Oh God, what do you want from me anyway? I asked, whining like a little spoiled child. He was really frustrating me. I couldn't figure him out. What did he want from me anyway? When you appear before me the final time, I will only have one question to ask of you. Did you learn to receive my love? Then he said, now go tell this to the world. And with that, he waved his big, big hand, and he sent me flying through the air like an astronaut flying through outer space. And then suddenly, I landed on my bed with a thud. I turned to my wife, who was asleep, and I said, honey, guess what happened? I just went to heaven. And I shook her and tried to awaken her. Oh, tell me tomorrow morning, she replied, rolling over and going right back to sleep. But please try to remember that I'm convinced that God is love, and when you get to heaven, he will be only concerned with this. Did you learn to receive his love? And now may God's beautiful and free love fill every moment of your life. You are my sunshine. There was a 3-year-old named Michael. His mother was about to give birth to a baby. Michael was so excited, very excited. He began singing songs to the baby in his mother's tummy. Simple songs, sweet, sweet songs. When the baby was born, she was a girl, but she had big problems. The doctor said to Michael's mother, there's not much hope. Be prepared for the worst. The girl was barely alive and she was very, very sick. Michael's parents heard the news from the doctor and they were very afraid. They became very sad, for they knew something was wrong with their little baby girl. Then Michael said to his mom, I want to see my sister. I want to sing to her. Well, his mother gave in to him and took Michael and dressed him and went to the hospital ward. But the nurse looked unhappily at Michael. He's not allowed in here. You take him out of here, she said. The baby was so sick, she could only be seen by her mother and father. My son and I are not leaving until my son has sung his little sister a song, said Michael's mother firmly. Then she grabbed Michael's little hand and took him right past the nurse and over to his sister's bed. There Michael sang one of the only songs he knew, a famous song called "You Are My Sunshine." It goes like this. You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. You make me happy when skies are gray. Well, suddenly, the little baby seemed to know that something was going on. Her racing pulse began to be steady. Sing on, Michael. Sing some more, commanded his mother. You never imagine how much I love you. Please don't take my sunshine away. Well, as Michael sang, the baby's breathing became quiet and the baby looked more peaceful. Michael's mother turned around and saw the tough old nurse was crying. And Michael's mother, she started crying too. As they listened to the boy singing from the bottom of his sweet little heart, the tears just ran down their faces. The next day, when Michael and his mother returned, they found to their amazement that the baby girl was so healthy that she could now go home. The doctors were amazed, for the little girl had been healed by the loving song of her big brother. The doctors called it a miracle, what I call a miracle of love. The Chief's Chair. My sister-in-law and I were walking down the dusty footpath from the hotel to the bus stop. Malawi is so much like other African nations, dusty, hot, but filled with people who, when they smile, they light up the day like the warmth of the sun. We came to some roadside stalls where people were selling things for tourists. Malawi has lots of beautiful things and beautiful woodwork. I saw in one of the stalls a chair low to the ground, which had some carvings of fish on it. I knew my wife would love the fish carvings, but it was light wood, unfinished. And so I turned to the vendor, a young man of about 18 or 19. How much? I asked. How much can you pay? He asked, smiling broadly at me. But this is not ebony, I said, trying to let him know that it was probably not worth very much. Ebony is rare, blackwood, and expensive. Oh no, not ebony. Most ebony in Africa is just black shoe polish, he said, laughing. So honest, I thought. Well, then his friend, about the same age, they also gathered around. So, if I buy this, you put shoe polish on it, and you make it look real, I asked. Make it very pretty. My wife likes fish, I said. This chief's chair, I make it very pretty. Wife like much. She happy, and if wife happy, you happy, no? He said, laughing again. His friends also were smiling and laughing and clapping their hands in amusement. And then they were looking at my young sister-in-law. Oh, no, not my wife. She's my wife's younger sister. My wife, very pretty lady, too. Special lady, I said. She likes fish. You make nice for us, I pay you good money. How much? I said to him. Well, we settled on a fair price, and I paid him. And that was where the odd thing happened. I assumed that now that he had his money, he and his friend would simply slap on some shoe polish on the wood and rush me out of there. But I was very wrong about these young men. Instead, they began very carefully sanding the wood until it was perfect, then applying the shoe polish so tenderly, like they were handling a baby. Their love for their work was so obvious, but it took over an hour, and we had to get on our way. Time was getting short, and the hour was getting late. Very pretty chair. Good job. Fine, fine. Okay, fine, I said, trying to hurry them along. Oh, yes, we make very nice chair. Best chair, he responded. Finally, after over an hour, they were done. Excuse me, but can you just wrap it in some newspaper so I can carry it back to the country I live in? I asked, expecting them to just wrap it with a local newspaper they had in their vendor stall. Oh, yes, we wrap it nice. Your wife like nice wrap. And then they began looking around the adjoining area for cardboard and string and paper, and we kept talking. We realized that one of the young men that we were talking to was coughing, and the other looked very weak. They must be sick. How are you feeling? I asked. Been sick long time, very long time, he said. And then my sister-in-law called me aside. These two young men, she said, have AIDS. They're dying. She whispered quietly to me. Look at the lesions, the sores, she said. She was working in a rural hospital in Malawi and knew what she was talking about. She looked like she was going to cry. I felt like crying myself. It seemed so sad to both of us. Those young men were such young men. It was such a waste. Well, thank you. Thank you for all your artwork. Thank you for the wrapping, too, was all I could say to these young men who were dying. Oh, no problem. Make your wife happy, make me happy, he said again. They collected cardboard, which was apparently hard to find, and they finally found some twine, very strong twine. And I saw the young man paying another older man for the twine. And then he began wrapping, but not in a hurry. He folded it very neatly, and he began to wrap this beautiful chief's chair just like he was making Japanese origami. And he tied the string, not just once, but maybe 20 to 30 times in various directions. It was complicated, but so beautiful. And he even made a handle out of cardboard so I could carry it. But that took another hour. Well, during that time, we asked them about their lives, they said very little. I asked if I could pray for their shop and bless it, and they consented. Yet all through the time, as my patience wore thin, for I thought surely I would miss my only bus out of there, I could see them working as hard as they could, so carefully, and I realized it was with great love. They were showing me their love in the only way they knew how. Oh, so beautiful wrapping. Chief's chair beautiful, I said, really meaning it. They smiled so broadly and looked at the ground. Well, I tried to hand them money. I tried to give them money for the string and for the wrapping, and to pay them for all the work and time and loving care they had put into wrapping this chief's chair. But no, sir, wrapping free, wrapping gift from us, he said shyly, gift for your missus. And as we walked away, I turned to my sister-in-law and I said, how much longer do you think these young men will have to live? Won't make it to the new year, she said, tears in her eyes. And as I carried the dearly wrapped treasure, I knew I was not just some tourist carrying a package, but that I was carrying a gift of love from some new friends. Such beautiful and perfect wrapping, don't you think? Don't you agree?